By the time dawn got enough color to separate sky from stubble, Heather Coleman had already crossed 2 fence lines, checked 1 stock tank, and backed her 1998 Ford F-25, up to the co-op scale, with a trailer of seed totes that rattled like old cast iron. The odometer read 312,417 miles. The driver's side door had to be lifted an inch before it would latch. Her coveralls were clean but patched at both knees with denim cut from jeans that had gone thin at the pocket seams. At the scale house window, a man in a camel hair coat and polished boots stood half-turned so everyone could notice his watch, a stainless Rolex with a blue face that flashed when he moved his hand. He was there to talk to the manager about leased storage and had arrived in a new black F-35, Platinum, with temporary tags and chrome mud flaps that still had dealership stickers. He glanced at Heather's truck, then at her, and gave that polite smile people use when they've already sorted someone into a lower shelf. "Ma'am, you might want to get that transmission looked at," he said, nodding toward the grinding reverse. "Expensive failure, if you let it go." Heather signed the scale ticket, calm as January. "It's not the transmission," she said. "It's a worn shifter bushing. $11.40 online. I put one in every 3 years." The scale operator laughed into his coffee. The man in the coat didn't. In town, people called Heather what they called any farmer without shiny equipment, and sponsored hats, hanging on. They saw the mismatched sheet metal on her machine shed roof, the hand-welded gate latch at her north entrance, the way she still bought work gloves in 3-packs from the discount aisle. What they didn't see was her balance sheet, because Heather never discussed it unless a lender legally required a signature. If they had seen it, the picture would have rearranged their opinions so fast it might have made them dizzy. 640 paid-off acres. No equipment note. No credit card balance. No long-term debt of any kind. And written in block letters at the top of her annual planning sheet, "Debt service can never exceed 12% of projected gross." That rule had started 24 years earlier at a bank desk that smelled like carpet glue and old paper. In 1999, at 26, Heather inherited 80 acres after her father died from a stroke in the middle of spring prep. He left behind no life-changing trust fund, just land that had already been divided and pared down through decades of medical bills and one ugly estate dispute. She took an operating loan of $42,000 at 8.25% because she had no choice, and she signed her name with a hand that shook hard enough to leave an ink blot at the tail of her last name. 3 months later, she watched a neighbor's sale day from the gravel shoulder. Tractors lined up like dead elephants. A seed tender sold for less than half of what was owed on it. The auctioneer kept his rhythm while a grown man stood with his jaw locked and eyes bright. Heather remembered the worst part wasn't the price tags. It was the silence from people who had promised to figure something out and didn't. That afternoon, she sat at her kitchen table and wrote 3 rules on the back of an electric bill envelope. 1. Never let borrowed money decide your sleep. 2. Buy ugly assets that earn, not pretty assets that impress. 3. In good years, hide cash from your own impulses. The third rule became arithmetic. Every profitable year, 35% of net operating profit went into a ladder of treasury bills. Another 15% went into a local money market reserve she treated as untouchable, except for weather disasters or opportunistic buys. The first year that did anything meaningful was small enough to look silly to outsiders. $4,900 into T-bills, $2,100 into reserve, but she did it anyway. Her mentor in those years was an unlikely one. Doris Schulte, a retired bookkeeper who ran payroll for 3 farm operations before opening a tax prep office next to the feed store. Doris wore bifocals on a chain and kept a ruler on her desk for emphasizing points. People don't go broke all at once, she told Heather every March. They go broke in tiny emotional decisions with monthly statements attached. Doris made her keep 3 ledgers instead of 1. Operating cash, capital replacement, and household. Heather hated the extra paperwork at first. Then she began to see patterns she'd never seen when everything was in a single checking account. Diesel creep, seed overages, subscription junk. She canceled, renegotiated, and cut. When corn ran good, she paid cash for used implements and left the new catalog glossy on the counter unopened. In 2007, when neighbors were bidding each other into rent deals that required perfect weather and lucky markets, Heather rented only what fit her cost model, and she gave up acres she couldn't justify. She got called timid. In 2012, during drought, timid looked a lot like solvent. In 2015, after 3 decent years, she could have bought a new combine with dealer financing at promotional rates that jumped later. Instead, she bought a 12-year-old machine from a retiring operator for $118,000 cash, then spent $9,300 replacing wear parts before first harvest. Her neighbors joked she collected antiques. Her depreciation curve smiled quietly in the background. By 2024, she had assembled 640 acres through patient purchases, mostly from heirs who wanted clean, quick closes and no financing drama. She paid fair, not flashy. She never negotiated while emotional. She never chased land at any price just because it touched her boundary fence. She drove old trucks because they were paid for and because she could hear in every squeak and rattle where money was leaking before it became expensive. The machine shed proved her philosophy in steel and grease. One bay held a planter with paint burned off at the toolbar welds. Another held a grain truck old enough to vote, with fresh brake lines and rebuilt injectors. She logged maintenance in composition notebooks dated and stacked in milk crates. If a repair was under $800 in parts and she could do it safely herself, she did it. If it was structural, hydraulic high pressure, or anything that could maim someone, she hired it out and wrote the check once. At spring consignment auctions, she was easy to miss. No branded jacket, no loud opinions. She carried a legal pad with 3 columns. Expected life, repair risk, and replacement cost if this bid went stupid. In April, she bought a 2011 field cultivator for $22,500, while 2 younger operators fought over a newer one that hit $61,000 before the hammer dropped. Her pick needed shanks and 1 wheel cylinder. Total rehab came in at $3,240. The expensive one needed a software module 6 weeks later. She did the same with the Lifestyle. Her house stayed the same 2-story farmhouse with original trim and drafts by the north windows. She replaced the roof only when necessary, not when fashionable. She cooked at home. She paid herself a modest household draw and treated personal spending like an employee she liked but didn't fully trust. She used 1 credit card for online farm inputs, paid in full monthly, and if a statement ever carried interest, she considered it a personal failure. By those habits, invisible from the road, her net worth reached roughly $6.8 million by late 2024, most of it in dirt, the safest kind of quiet. Then, one Tuesday after Co-op Scale closed, while she was sweeping seed dust off the trailer deck, a man in a pressed navy blazer stepped from a white SUV and introduced himself as Wyatt Reeves. "Miss Coleman?" "Wyatt Reeves, Prairie Meridian Holdings." He offered a card thick enough to stand on edge. I won't waste your evening. We'd like to make an offer on your acreage. Heather set the broom against the trailer and waited. Reeves spoke in polished bullet points, as if rehearsed in front of a mirror. Prairie Meridian would pay $18,500 per acre for all 640 acres. Total consideration, $11.84 million, all cash. Close in 21 days. No financing contingency. They could include what he called gold certainty, a $250,000 earnest deposit held in bullion-backed escrow to signal seriousness. If she worried about moving, they'd lease back her house lot so she could, in his words, retire gracefully in place. He handed her a draft contract clipped in a leather folder. The paper smelled faintly of toner and expensive cologne. At the diner that night, the offer spread table to table faster than pie plates. Men with fertilizer under their nails did napkin math under fluorescent lights. Someone calculated likely capital gains and state taxes. Someone else added in basis assumptions. Consensus landed around the same number. She could walk with about $9.1 million net, maybe more with careful structuring. A neighbor shook his head in disbelief. That's generational money, Heather. She took a sip of coffee, opened the folder again, and read the acreage schedule, line by line. Then she folded the contract into quarters, slid it back into the folder, and pushed it across the table toward Wyatt Reeves. No, she said. The booth went quiet enough to hear the fridge compressor kick on behind the counter. In a county where some families were refinancing operating lines at 9.75%. Her answer looked either stubborn or foolish. Heather paid for her coffee, left $2 for the waitress, and drove home in the old Ford. The shifter bushing, clicking softly into second like a small, satisfied metronome. The gravel popped under her tires as she turned in at the north gate. Yard light washed the machine shed in a dull cone, catching the patched roof panels where galvanized tin met older red steel in crooked seams. Heather shut the truck off and sat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel, listening to the engine tick itself cool. Inside, she didn't pour whiskey or call anybody. She set a kettle on, pulled the 2024 ledger binder from the shelf above the microwave, and clipped Wyatt Reeves's card to the inside cover with a red paperclip. She wrote one line beneath it. Offer equals opinion, not instruction. Then she started where she always started. History, not mood. By midnight, 3 legal pads sat open on the kitchen table, each with columns and dates in black ink. Heather's handwriting was square and even, like fence posts. On the first page, she wrote 1999 and circled it twice. Operating gross that year had been $86,400 on the inherited 80, and a little custom work with a borrowed cultivator. Inputs, fuel, insurance, and loan service chewed most of it. Net after everything, $14,000 and change. She remembered exactly how absurd Doris thought her allocations looked. 35% into T-bills? On that? Doris had asked, lifting her bifocals. On that, Heather had said. So $4,900 went into 13 and 26-week bills rolled manually, and $2,100 into the money market reserve at the local bank. She left herself less than comfort and learned what discomfort cost. $2,000. Better weather, better basis, net near $18,600. T-bills, $6,510. Reserve, $2,790. 2001. Wet spring, late planting, ugly fall. Net dropped under $11,000. She still funded both buckets, just smaller. She skipped replacing the pickup tires until cords showed, and then bought used takeoffs from a mechanic in Juniata. 2002. She signed her first flex rent arrangement on 60 neighboring acres with an elderly landlord who cared more about timely checks than coffee shop bravado. Net climbed to $27,300. She pre-bought fuel when diesel dipped and saved enough to notice. 2003. First year she touched $40,000 net. Instead of celebrating, she put $14,200 into treasuries, $6,000 into reserve, and started a third sub-account labeled Capital Replacement with $8,000. That account was for iron only, no exceptions. By 2004, she had enough cash, plus a small note, to buy 40 acres from cousins settling an estate. Purchase price, $74,000 total, less than one new high-horse tractor at the time. She paid the note in 4 years early and wrote in her ledger margin, "Land lasts longer than ego." 2005 through 2008 were the years she called quiet acceleration. Commodity prices moved, then lurched. Neighbors bought on optimism. She bought on arithmetic. She added rented acres only when projected debt service stayed below the 12% line. She bought a used grain trailer for $9,800 cash, then spent 2 weekends replacing lights and floor patches. She stacked T-bills quarterly, never breaking the ladder. In 2008, when credit tightened and people started saying liquidity event as if English had failed them, Heather had 14 months of operating expenses between reserve and short bills, not wealth. Breathing room. 2009. She bought another 80 acres, this time from a widow who wanted one closing, one check, no delays. Price, $2,350 an acre, $188,000 total. She put $120,000 down from accumulated bills and reserve, financed the rest fixed, then attacked principal with every post-harvest surplus until it was gone. 2010 and 2011, decent crops, disciplined spending, no lifestyle drift. Household draw rose only 3% across both years. She replaced a failing dryer motor, rewired one grain bin fan, and drove the same truck. T-bill ladder crossed 6 figures for the first time. Then 2012 drought came and slapped everybody awake. She had crop insurance, low fixed obligations, and no equipment payments. She came out bruised but upright. 2 neighbors didn't. After that year, her rules hardened. Every projection had a bad weather row and a stupid market row. If the plan failed either one, it didn't happen. 2013 to 2016. She accumulated acreage in pieces, 40 here, 120 there, mostly from heirs who wanted certainty. She paid fair market when she could close clean in days, not months. She refused 2 bidding wars that went above what rent could support. People said she was leaving money on the table. She wrote in her notebook, "Better than leaving blood on it." In 2015, she made the combine decision people laughed at. 12-year-old machine, $118,000 cash, $9,300 in rehab. Her cost per harvested acre, averaged over seasons, landed thousands below neighbors carrying fresh notes. By 2017, she crossed 480 owned acres. Treasury ladder plus reserve could cover an entire crop year if weather and price both failed. She didn't tell anyone. 2018 was the year of tariffs and basis pain. Cash bids went sideways. Operators with thin margins bled. Heather stored, timed sales, and survived because she wasn't forced to move grain to make payments due by month end. 2019. She bought 80 more at $5,900 per acre from a retiring bachelor farmer with no children. Total $472,000, mostly cash from maturities and retained earnings. No variable rate debt, no bridge loan. 2020 pandemic year. chaos in one column, opportunity in another. She locked input discounts early, avoided panic purchasing, and harvested solid. She also increased reserve target from 12 to 18 months of core expenses, 2021 and 2022. High prices, then volatile everything. She did not mistake windfall for genius. Profit allocations remained mechanical, 35% treasuries, 15% reserve, then capital and taxes. She paid contractors to retile 2 problem fields, upgraded 1 well pump, and still carried no long-term note. By 2023, she held 640 acres free and clear. By 2024, after valuing land conservatively and equipment harshly, net worth penciled near $6.8 million. She capped her pen and looked at the numbers the way a mechanic looks at a rebuilt engine. Not proud, exactly, just attentive. Nothing in 24 years had happened quickly. That was the point. The next morning, the county started talking as if speed had suddenly become wisdom. At the co-op coffee counter, men she'd known since 4-H swiveled toward her when she walked in for hydraulic couplers. 18.5, and she says no, one muttered, loud enough. Must be sentimental, another said, or stubborn. No one said disciplined, because discipline is boring until it outperforms entertainment. By Thursday, her nephew, Caleb, knocked at her back door with mud on his boots and panic in his voice. 29 years old, farming 120 rented acres plus part-time trucking, he carried the permanent squint of someone always looking at the next bill. Aunt Heather, I'm saying this because I care, he said, not sitting down. Take the deal. Put it in index funds. 7% average, you're done. No weather, no breakdowns, no diesel roulette. She slid him a chair and 2 eggs over toast. You done your own numbers? I did enough numbers to know 11.8 million is not a no. After taxes, not 11.8? Fine. 9-ish. Still, she nodded. Still real money. Caleb rubbed his forehead. Then why are we even talking? 'Cause she loved him, she answered straight. Because averages don't feed years. Sequence risk matters. Timing matters. Taxes matter. Control matters. If I sell, I convert a productive asset into a portfolio I can't repair with a wrench. He laughed once, frustrated. You can't wrench the rain either. No, she said. That's why I keep my break-even low. He pushed his plate away, half-finished. I'm just saying, everyone thinks you're crazy. That's not fatal, she said. He left with a hug that felt like an argument wearing family clothes. At the bank on Friday, her lender, Mark Ellison, spoke in the gentle tone bankers use when they're trying not to sound like salesmen. You know I respect your operation, he said, tapping the folder. But this offer is extraordinary. You could net around $9 million and place a large block into AA Munis at 5.2. Tax advantaged, low volatility, no agronomic risk. Heather studied the frame photo behind him. His kids in soccer uniforms, all smiles and shin guards. You saying sell because it's best for me, she asked, or because you're worried what's coming? Mark held her gaze a beat too long. Both can be true. She appreciated that answer. Fear disguised as certainty annoyed her. Honest uncertainty did not. Across the county, the same economics were squeezing everyone, just not equally. Travis and Lynn Becker had expanded from 700 acres to 1,900 in 6 years, mostly rented at top market cash bids during the boom. They were smart, hard-working, up before dawn, and not reckless in the cartoon sense. But they had financed a new combine, 2 late-model tractors, and a high-clearance sprayer within a 30-month window because efficiency and tax strategy favored it at the time. Their annual fixed machinery and term debt service now sat north of $540,000 before seed touched soil. Their break-even corn, with rent and overhead, hovered near $4.85 on good yields. Miguel Ortiz, who farmed west of Juniata, had taken a variable rate operating line when rates were cheap, then rolled 2 dry years into restructuring notes while betting one big crop would reset everything. The crop did not cooperate. His inputs were financed, his grain was often pre-sold just to satisfy lenders, and he was perpetually one weather event away from a triage. Darren Pohl ran a clean operation with immaculate iron and military neatness. He also carried more equipment depreciation than land ownership because he preferred to scale through custom work and rented ground. When parts and labor inflation hit, his repair budget doubled in 18 months. He worked harder to stand still. None of them were fools. They had families, obligations, and years where the aggressive path made sense on paper. But the paper had been drawn during cheap money and kind weather. Those conditions had expired. Heather's own path looked old-fashioned because it was old-fashioned. Own what you can, owe little, and never require a perfect year to survive an average one. By March, pressure stopped being social and turned numeric. Anhydrous quotes came in 18% higher than the prior spring. Seed corn list prices rose about 11%, with trait packages nobody could avoid if they wanted predictable control. Crop insurance premiums climbed again after back-to-back hail claims countywide. Diesel swung like a gate in wind. At the co-op bulletin board, someone pinned a photocopy of rates from 3 local lenders, operating lines as high as 9.75%. Heather sat with her input spreadsheet and rebuilt it line by line. She cut where cuts were real, not performative, negotiated freight on dry fertilizer, switched one hybrid package on lower response ground, delayed a non-critical shop upgrade, and prepaid what earned discount. She locked a chunk of nitrogen early despite the sting, because uncertainty had become more expensive than certainty. Her projected break-even landed at $3.62. Corn across owned acres. She wrote it in thick marker on the top corner of her whiteboard in the office. Then July came mean. Rain missed them in ugly patterns, fields 2 miles apart getting different skies. By the second week, dryland corn leaves rolled by noon and stayed that way until dusk. Pastures crisped at the edges. Heat sat heavy and wind carried dust where it shouldn't. County extension estimates started revising down, then down again. By August, many dryland operators were staring at yield cuts near a third from trend. At the Cenex, conversations changed from marketing to survival. Travis Becker stood by the air pump, cap in his hands. "We need 190 to make it pencil," he said to nobody in particular. "I'm seeing 135 on the rough quarter." Miguel Ortiz skipped one equipment payment in June to cover chemical. In August, he missed term debt service entirely and got a default notice with cure language he read 3 times before showing his wife. He drove to Heather's one evening, parked but didn't get out, then backed out again and left. Pride has mileage. In September, Darren Pohl listed his sprayer privately before harvest and took an offer $40,000 below what he owed because the bank wanted liquidity now, not after hope. Auction notices began appearing on mailbox posts and bulletin boards. The thin paper fluttering in wind like surrender flags, no one wanted to read. 3 names Heather had known since high school entered forced sale calendars before first frost. What protected her wasn't magic timing. It was the absence of monthly blood loss, no combine payment due the 1st, no land note due the 15th, no variable rate line repricing every lender meeting. She still hurt, revenue lower, stress high, every decision expensive, but pain stayed in the category of management, not collapse. At 148 bushels actual average, she remained cash flow positive because her structure had been built for ugly years, not just pretty ones. In late September, Wyatt Reeves called again. "Market conditions are deteriorating," he said, voice smooth as polished stone. "Our offer remains generous, possibly less so in future windows." Heather stood in her machine shed with a grease gun in one hand and her phone on speaker balanced on the fender. "Generous for who?" she asked, a pause. "For both parties, ideally." She wiped grease on a rag. "I'll keep your card?" After she hung up, she looked across the open bay to the fields beyond, rose dulled by drought haze and afternoon light. Every acre carried risk. She had never pretended otherwise. But risk with control was different from risk with obligation. At dusk, she drove past the Becker place and saw a banker's SUV in the lane. At Ortiz's, a yellow legal notice was tucked under the screen door. At the pole shop, one bay sat empty where the sprayer had been. She did not feel superior. She felt angry at a system that rewarded bravado in easy years and punished honesty in hard ones. She felt, too, the sharp edge of opportunity, the kind that arrives dressed like other people's bad news and asks what you're willing to do with your preparedness. That night, she opened her ledger again, turned to a fresh page, and wrote, "If forced sellers appear on adjoining ground, buy only at numbers that survive bad weather and low price. No variable debt. Hard cap, $10,000 per acre." Under that, she added one more line, slower. "No celebrating distress. But don't waste the lesson either." She tore the sheet from the legal pad, clipped it into the binder, and reached for her phone. There was one person she trusted to tell her when she was being smart and when she was being self-righteous. Doris answered on the second ring. "If this is social, call me tomorrow." "Call me. If it's numbers, talk." "It's numbers," Heather said. "Good. Come by at 8. And bring that spine of yours. I may have to hit it with a ruler." Doris's office still smelled like paper, coffee, and old printer toner. The waiting chairs had the same cracked vinyl seams. But now there was an oxygen concentrator tucked behind her desk, humming softly under the file cabinet. Heather spread her notes, including Wyatt Reeves's card and the line she had written under it. "Offer equals opinion, not instruction." Doris read silently, then tapped the card. "He came to you for a reason. Men like this don't chase random dirt." "I know." "Do you?" Doris slid open a drawer and pulled out a folded county soil map marked with yellow highlighter. "Talked to Ed Renshaw yesterday. Retired NRCS. He consults for half the county and complains for all of it. He's coming." Ed arrived 10 minutes later in a faded windbreaker with an NRCS patch gone threadbare at the edges. He set down a tube of maps and a tablet with cracked corners and got straight to it. "Prairie Meridian isn't buying for next year's corn check," he said. "They're buying for 20 years of control." He unrolled the first map. Heather recognized her parcels immediately, contiguous blocks outlined in thick blue marker. Then she saw the overlays, organic matter bands, recharge zones, water holding profiles. "Your ground averages 3.8% organic matter," Ed said, pointing with a mechanical pencil. "That's unusually strong this far south for this texture. Here, deep silt loam, good structure, low slope, fewer fragmentation issues than almost anywhere around you. And this corridor sits over one of the better recharge pathways feeding into the broader Ogallala system." Heather leaned in. "So they want water rights leverage." "They want optionality," Ed corrected. "Water, carbon protocols, long horizon lease stacking, maybe conservation easement arbitrage if policy shifts. Big funds buy what they can model and defend. Your farm is modelable and defensible. Doris snorted. In English? In English, Ed said. Her old-fashioned farm is an institution-grade asset. Silence sat for a second. Then Heather asked the only question that mattered to her. Keep versus sell. Conservative assumptions. Help me check it. Ed and Doris exchanged a look that meant, here we go. For 2 hours, they built scenarios at Doris's desk calculator pace, slow enough to catch lies. Sell now. $11,840,000 gross offer. Estimated tax basis and transaction costs applied. Projected net after federal/state taxes and fees, roughly $9,080,000 to $9,240,000 depending on structure. Invest proceeds. If placed mostly in munis and broad index mix, blended after-tax real return assumptions range 3.1% to 4.6%, with sequence risk in first 5 years. Keep land. NOI assumption, $265 per acre, average over cycle on 640 acres equals $169,600 annual operating net before reinvestment effects. Land appreciation assumption, 4% annually, conservative against historical spikes. Reinvestment yield 3% on retained earnings. 12-year modeled, pre-tax asset value, about $15.2 million equivalent. Stress case, 3 poor yield years in 12, lower commodity band, modest input inflation, keep scenario still outperformed immediate sell by high 6 figures, and retained control. Doris clicked her pen shut. You were right to pause. Ed nodded. Now you need to stop reacting and start hunting. Hunting what? Distress with fundamentals, he said. Adjoining acres. Price to rent that works in ugly years. Heather wrote a line in capital letters. Under $10,000 per acre only. No variable rate debt. Doris watched her write. That's not fear anymore. No, Heather said. It's a fence. The wealth reveal happened 3 days later, and not because Heather wanted theater. It happened because she needed a formal proof of funds letter for a possible courthouse auction, and because small towns run on proximity. She walked into Heartland Community Bank at 10:12 a.m. with a manila folder and mud on her boots. Mark Ellison looked up from his office and waved her in, then paused when he saw who was in the lobby chairs. Caleb. He stood too quickly, jaw tight, clutching a folder of his own. I'm not eavesdropping, he said before anyone accused him. Then don't, Heather said, gentler than the words. Mark closed the office door but left the blinds half open. You need bidder certification? Need a letter showing liquid capacity for up to $3.2 million. No liens against existing acres. Mark nodded, then pulled up her accounts. His expression changed in stages. Routine, focused, then briefly startled before he smoothed it away. Mind if I print full schedule for signature? He asked. Do it. Pages slid from the printer in steady clicks. Mark aligned them, read once, then turned the stack so she could review. It was the first time anyone in town had seen her entire structure in one place under her conservative valuation method. Operating cash and near cash. $418,230. Money market reserve. $1,127,400. Treasury bill ladder, varied maturities. $2,306,000. Capital replacement account. $286,900. Unencumbered equipment. Conservative liquidation value. $492,000. Land, 640 acres, no debt, carried at conservative hold value basis in this statement. $2,198,000. Total assets, $6,828,530. Total liabilities, zero long-term, $22,100. Current payables, scheduled inside 30 days. Documented net worth, $6,806,430. Mark sat back. Heather, this is accurate, she said. It's more than accurate. It's exceptional. Outside the office, the lobby door opened and shut twice. Voices drifted in. Someone laughed at something near the teller line. The world continued, unaware that the county's favorite example of hanging on was sitting on a balance sheet most operators would never touch. Mark lowered his voice. You realize if this letter circulates, it won't from me. He signed, stamped, and slid over a single-page summary. Available verified liquidity for immediate certified funds. $3,851,630. When she stepped back into the lobby, Caleb was pretending to read a pamphlet about college savings plans. He looked up, saw the bank stamp on her envelope, and then, because he was family and scared and 29, asked the question, how much do you actually have? Heather could have dodged. For years she had dodged. This time she didn't. $6,806,430 net on paper today, she said. That's conservative carry. If I mark dirt to headline comps, it prints higher. I don't underwrite my life that way. His face went blank first, then red. You said nothing. I said plenty. You didn't like the part where it took 24 years. Caleb swallowed. I thought you were just barely ahead. That was the point, she said. Looking rich is expensive. A teller, pretending not to listen, dropped a pen. By noon, half the county knew some version of the number. By supper, the number had grown twice in retelling. By bedtime, 3 people had decided she must have inherited secretly, because admitting patience beat leverage was harder than believing in hidden luck. Requests started quietly. A text from Caleb. Can we talk? For real this time? A call from Ana Ortiz. I hate asking. Miguel got cure notice. We have 10 days. A voicemail from Darren Pohl. Voice rough. Need short bridge or I lose truck and 2 custom contracts. Heather ignored all of them for 6 hours, not out of cruelty, but because rushed generosity is how money becomes theater. At dusk, she called Doris. If I help, it has to multiply, not disappear. Then require structure, Doris said. And homework. By morning, they had a plan and a legal pad full of terms. No gifts disguised as loans. No rescues for bad math repeated. Fixed 2% interest, transparent amortization. Collateral where appropriate. Mandatory monthly bookkeeping sessions at Doris's office. Missed 2 sessions. Rate jumps to commercial prime, +2. Goal, keep families operating, cut high-interest bleed, rebuild decisions. They started at Heather's kitchen table with Caleb. He came in defensive, left humbled. His books showed exactly what she expected. Not laziness, not stupidity, just thin margins and expensive leaks. Dealer note at 11.9% on a nearly new strip-till rig he didn't need at his current scale. 2 credit cards carrying seasonal overages from chemical and truck repairs. Crop marketing done in bursts of anxiety instead of plan. Heather slid a term sheet over. $60,500, she said. $48,000 to retire the dealer note down to sane size. $12,500 for operating cushion. 2% fixed, 5 years. Monthly payment $1,061. Collateral. Truck title until principal under $30,000. You attend Doris's bookkeeping class every first Tuesday. Caleb stared. This is less than half my current payment burden. It's also not free. His eyes watered before he blinked it away. Why would you do this? Because I'd rather finance your discipline than attend your auction. He signed. Next were Miguel and Ana Ortiz. They arrived together, hands locked so tight their knuckles blanched. Miguel laid his bank notice on the table without speaking. Default amount to cure, $68,400 plus fees. Deadline, 9 days. Heather had already run rough numbers from what she knew of their acres and equipment. I can do $74,000, she said. Cure's default and legal costs with a little breathing room, 2% fixed, 7 years. First 6 months interest only while you reset cash flow. Then amortization. Collateral is second lien on paid-off West 40. An assignment of crop insurance proceeds up to outstanding balance. Miguel finally spoke. If we miss? If you hide, we're done. If you communicate early, we restructure once, not twice. Ana nodded quickly. We communicate. Also, Heather added, you both attend class, not just Miguel. Ana almost smiled. Good. I trust my own math more than his. By day's end, documents were signed. Heather wired $74,000 through Heartland. Mark confirmed receipt to the Ortiz lender by 4:17 p.m. The default cure clock stopped. Darren Pohl came the following afternoon with grease under his nails and a folder organized like an audit file. His need was smaller but immediate. $27,300 to repair a semi-transmission and cover insurance so he could keep 2 contracted grain haul routes through harvest. No truck, no routes. No routes, no winter cash, he said. Heather reviewed his invoices, then made 2 changes. I'll loan $27,300 at 2% for 30 months, she said. But you sell one underused header trailer and apply proceeds directly to principal within 60 days. And you stop carrying subscription software on equipment you don't own. Darren gave a short laugh. You sound like my banker, if my banker cared whether I stayed alive. Your banker cares whether the note stays alive, Heather said. Different organism? He signed. Within 10 days, she had committed $161,800 across 3 households. Not charity, not extraction. Bridge capital with accountability. Outcomes came fast because the alternative had been immediate damage. Caleb's monthly fixed obligations dropped by roughly $1,740 between refinanced note terms and card payoff strategy. First-year interest savings projected $6,400 to $7,100 depending on prepayments. More important, he now had a crop marketing calendar taped to his fridge instead of 3 sticky notes and hope. The Ortiz foreclosure threat was withdrawn in writing. Ana sent Heather a photo of the letter on the kitchen table with a single message. We can breathe tonight. By restructuring input purchasing and reducing custom pass redundancy, their projected break-even fell by about 38 cents per bushel. Darren repaired the truck in 6 days, kept both haul contracts, and grossed enough through late harvest to make his first 3 payments early. He sold the trailer exactly as required and texted proof. $8,900 applied to principal. On the first Tuesday in November, all 3 sat in Doris's office with 10 other operators for the first mandatory bookkeeping class. Doris stood at the whiteboard with her ruler and wrote in giant letters, "Cash flow is a moral document." Not because money is virtue, she told them, because hidden numbers eventually become pain for people you claim to love. Heather sat in the back, silent, taking notes like she was the student. That night, she built the deeper model that would decide her next decade. Not vibes, not gossip, math. She split it into 2 linked pages. Personal balance sheet, integrity, and expansion stress test. Page 1 verified she could deploy up to $3 million and still maintain a minimum liquidity buffer of $650,000 after taxes, operating needs, and committed bridge loans. She layered maturities from her treasury ladder so no forced sale would occur at a bad moment. 4-week, 13-week, 26-week tranches with staggered redemption dates. She penciled penalties for worst-case input spikes and inserted a drought yield row below trend. Page 2 tested acquisition scenarios for adjoining parcels from 160 to 400 acres. Assumptions. Purchase threshold, under $10,000 per acre. Immediate rehab allowance, $250 to $400 per acre for tile. Well, fertility correction. Rent equivalent floor, target NOI not less than 2.6% in stress case year 1, improving with operational integration. No variable rate debt. If any financing used, fixed, and debt service, kept under existing 12% rule based on combined projected gross. Then she ran historical echoes against it. What would this structure have done in 2012 drought, 2018 basis collapse, 2020 volatility, 2022 input shock? She forced ugly numbers until something broke. It didn't. Under conservative yield and price assumptions, combined operation remained solvent with positive operating cash even in 2 consecutive weak years. Liquidity dipped but stayed above her red line. Optional pre-sales at favorable prices could further stabilize downside. Fertilizer pre-buy and partial hedge strategy reduced variance. Repair reserves covered known aging equipment risk. She added one more section. Community impact leverage. If she allocated 5% of annual net operating surplus going forward to structured local bridge lending at 2%, with strict bookkeeping compliance, modeled default under disciplined underwriting stayed below 4.5%. Even with one full default in 10 loans, community-level savings from avoided high-interest dealer notes and preserved farm continuity outpaced losses in under 5 years. She circled that number twice. This, she realized, was the part no fund manager could price from a blazer. Local knowledge turned into selective mercy, with compounding attached. Near midnight, she heard rain finally start. Light at first, then steady on the patched shed roof. She stood at the kitchen window and watched the water stripe the yard light beam. On the counter beside her, the auction notice for 320 adjoining acres sat under a magnet shaped like a seed corn logo. Date, November 14th. Terms, certified funds, 14-day close. Heather took a black pen and wrote at the top of the notice, bid only if it still works in a bad year. Then she clipped it into the binder behind the page that said, offer equals opinion, not instruction, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed with the numbers quiet and ready. Rain held through the night and into morning. A slow, soaking kind that didn't fix a drought but softened the top 2 inches enough to make people stand on porches and exhale. On November 14th, the courthouse meeting room smelled like wet coats and burnt coffee. Folding chairs lined the walls. Men from 2 states over sat with open laptops and wireless hotspots, blinking blue. A woman from Omaha in a charcoal suit had a spreadsheet projected on a tablet stand, her assistant whispering cap rate thresholds into her ear like prayers. Heather came in with a legal pad, 1 sharpened pencil, and a cream envelope from Heartland Community Bank. Travis Becker gave her a tired nod from the back row. He wasn't bidding. His lender had him in observe-only mode. Mark Ellison stood near the door with 2 other bankers and looked like he hadn't slept. The auctioneer read terms fast. 320 adjoining acres, sold as 1 tract, certified funds, 14-day close, no financing contingency, as is with known irrigation deficiencies disclosed in Packet Appendix C. "Opening at 8,000, he called. Hands went up in tidy intervals. 85, 88, 9,000. At $9,200 an acre, rhythm broke. Heather had posted the standing 9-2 bid and kept her card angled chest high as the room stalled. One fund manager in a Navy vest leaned over to his engineer, who flipped through repair notes and tapped a line item. Probable well column replacement plus tile rehab variance. The manager shook his head once and lowered his card. The auctioneer scanned the room. 9-2 I have. Looking for 9-3? 9-3 anywhere? Silence. Jacket sleeves creaked. Somebody coughed. Heather raised her bidder card. 9-2. The auctioneer pointed. 9-2 at Coleman. Need 9-3 to stay in. No one moved. Fair warning. Sold. The gavel crack snapped through the room like a branch breaking. At the clerk's desk, 15 minutes later, she signed without flourish. Deposit wired same day. On day 14, exactly as terms required, she closed with no financing contingencies. Total purchase outlay, $2,944,000. Within a week, she authorized $86,000 in immediate tile and well work. No heroic upgrades, just practical fixes that converted uncertainty into known performance. In December, while coffee shop talk still argued whether she had overpaid, Heather made 2 calls and 1 hedge. She pre-sold 40% of the coming season's corn from the integrated acres at $4.88. She locked a fertilizer tranche early before winter run-up. She penciled a stress row where prices fell and yields disappointed anyway. "Still works?" Doris asked over speakerphone. "Still works," Heather said. Then stopped touching it. First Tuesday in January, Doris's office overflowed. 20 chairs, 26 people, 2 standing at the back with notebooks on the windowsills. The oxygen concentrator hummed louder in winter. Doris slapped her ruler against the whiteboard. "Monthly close, not quarterly confession. Caleb, you're up." Caleb stood with a spiral notebook and looked like a man walking into church after years away. He wrote numbers in block letters. December net cash flow, plus $2,140. Dealer note principal paid, $3,000 extra credit cards. 0 revolving. Doris squinted. "How'd you do it?" He glanced at Heather, then back to Doris. "Stopped pretending I needed a new strip-till pass every time somebody on YouTube said efficiency. Sold 2 unused attachments. Shifted 1 field to lower-cost program," Aunt Heather flagged. "And I quit moving grain because I was nervous," Heather cut in. He also started calling basis before lunch and writing target orders instead of waiting for panic. The room laughed, but not meanly. Caleb laughed too, embarrassed and proud in equal measure. By March, he had 18 straight on-time payments. In June, he walked into Heartland and refinanced his truck at better terms because his books now looked like a business, not a weather report. By harvest, a retired landlord east of Hanson offered him 80 more acres, not because he bid highest rent, but because he brought a printed cash flow projection and 3 years of clean records to the kitchen table. "I picked you because you answered my wife's question about downside first," the landlord told him, sliding over the lease. "Everybody else sold us upside." Caleb texted Heather a photo of the signed lease and 1 line. "You were right. Looking rich is expensive." Miguel and Ana Ortiz came to class together every month, even when roads were glare ice and Anna had to drive. In February, Anna took over the operating ledger entirely. "No offense," she told Miguel in front of everybody, "but hope is not a category in QuickBooks." By April, they had renegotiated input purchases using early pay discounts. Heather showed them how to calculate. They dropped one redundant custom pass and switched to field zone applications, where it actually mattered. They sold a small recreational parcel they'd been clinging to emotionally and applied proceeds to principal, cutting annual interest drag immediately. One stormy evening in July, when radar showed hail marching toward the township, Miguel stood in Heather's machine shed doorway, soaked to the elbows. "I need to show you this," he said, handing over his phone. It was a screenshot from his lender portal. Loan status, current, no cure notices, no red flags, just current. He let out a breath that looked like a year leaving his body. "Anna says I sleep now." From the kitchen, Anna called out, "He snores now." Different problem. When dry heat hit again the following season, the Ortiz operation didn't glide. It bent, but it didn't break. Their revised break-even and insurance discipline gave them room. Their oldest daughter stayed in community college instead of dropping out to patch family cash flow. Their youngest kept her 4 H lambs, because feed money existed this time. At Christmas, they brought Heather tamales and a typed letter signed by both of them. "We thought rescue meant someone paying our bills. You gave us terms that made us pay attention." Darren Pohl treated the 2% note like a contract with his own future. He made automatic payments every month at 6 a.m. on the 1st, then texted the confirmation screenshot unprompted. He sold the header trailer as agreed. He canceled software subscriptions he'd been carrying from a larger phase of the business and redirected that bleed into a repair reserve. He took one less custom contract that looked good gross, but terrible after labor and fuel. In September, a younger operator named Benji Lark called him from the shoulder of Highway 6 with a dead semi and a load due by midnight. Old Darren would have quoted emergency rates and moved on. New Darren asked one question first. "You got your books done for August?" A pause. "No." "Then while I'm towing you, you're coming to class Tuesday." By winter, Darren had become unofficial compliance enforcer for Doris's program. He'd sit beside latecomers with his own ledger open and say, "You can lie to your banker once. You can't lie to your checking account." His bridge note paid off 6 months early. The multiplier effect stopped being Theory 1 cold Friday when Mark Ellison spread county delinquency reports across his desk and called Heather. "I ran 12-month comparisons," he said. "Among households in your structure program, high-interest equipment delinquency dropped hard. We have fewer emergency restructures in that cohort than in the rest of comparable size ops." "How many?" she asked. "Enough that our board asked what changed." "What'd you tell them?" "That one farmer started underwriting behavior." By then, 3 loans had become 5. 5 became 9 over 2 seasons, each with the same rules. Fixed 2%, capped amounts, mandatory bookkeeping, early communication, consequences for hiding. 2 families publicly said those loans kept their farms through drought year cash squeezes. One young operator avoided signing a 12.4% dealer note because the fund covered a used planter overhaul instead. Another replaced predatory, short-term input credit with structured, transparent payments and stopped skipping health insurance to float seed bills. At the diner, people began saying, "Do the Heather math," when someone pitched a shiny purchase. Nobody said that 2 years earlier. In late spring, Wyatt Reeves came back. He requested a brief strategic conversation at the same diner booth where she had folded his first contract. He wore a different watch this time, and a smile calibrated for damage control. "Congratulations on your expansion," he said, setting down a folder slimmer than before. "Prairie Meridian is prepared to discuss partnership structures now. You retain operational control. We provide capital efficiencies. There may be room to revisit your legacy acres at improved terms." Heather didn't touch the folder. "Improved for who?" She asked, same question, same tone. He gave a practiced chuckle. You remember everything. I remember enough. He leaned in. Frankly, we underestimated your liquidity position. That won't happen again. That's not a compliment, she said. For once, he dropped the script. No, it isn't. 2 months later, the grain processor announced a shuttle loading expansion 15 miles away. Rail improvements, storage incentives, basis support. Comparable land sales in the corridor printed at $18,400 per acre. The 320 acres she bought at $9,200 effectively doubled in market value on paper inside a year. Wyatt called once more. She let it ring out. Word came through Ed Renshaw that Prairie Meridian's regional acquisition team was restructured after missing several contiguous tracks, including hers. Wyatt was reassigned south to a water rights portfolio where local memory was shorter. He sent one final email, 3 lines, no cologne, no flourish. You made the right call. I was paid to make mine. Respect. Heather archived it and went back to calibrating a seed meter. By 2026, on a bright March morning with frost still silvering the ditches, Heather stood in the county extension meeting room beside a folding table and signed papers creating the Coleman Revolving Ag Ledger Fund. Seed capital, $1.2 million. Loan cap, $75,000 per operator. Fixed rate, 2%. Required coursework, bookkeeping, cash flow stress testing, and marketing discipline. Disbursement rule, money only for productive assets or high-interest debt replacement, never lifestyle. Doris, now 79 and fiercer than ever, signed as education director. I want this in writing, Doris told the room. Missing class is missing payment. If you don't respect numbers, numbers won't respect you. Ed Renshaw signed on as soil and land practice advisor for borrowers taking ground improvement loans. No sense financing short-term survival by wrecking long-term dirt, he said. Mark Ellison represented Heartland as servicing partner. He looked at Heather after signatures dried and said, You know most people with your net worth hide from this kind of responsibility. Heather capped her pen. Most people didn't watch Sale Day Silence at 26. Outside, Caleb was already helping stack chairs. Where everyone landed, Heather Coleman controlled 960 acres. Her original 640, plus the 320 acquired at auction. 0 long-term debt. 6-figure liquidity buffer maintained even after fund capitalization. Documented net worth, conservatively marked, just over $13.9 million. She still drove the 1998 Ford, now above 340,000 miles, still with the occasional shifter click. She added one indulgence: heated mirrors from a salvage yard. Caleb. Farming, 200 acres total with better lease terms and far cleaner books. Dealer debt down to manageable levels. No revolving card balances. He became a volunteer assistant in Doris's classes, teaching younger operators how to build a marketing calendar instead of emotional grain sales. At Thanksgiving, he brought pumpkin pie and a printed balance sheet as a joke. Heather pinned it to the fridge anyway. Miguel and Ana Ortiz kept all core acres. Default history cleared after sustained current status. Ana handled finance and lender communications. Miguel focused field operations and finally admitted those were 2 different jobs. Their daughter finished community college and came back part-time to manage precision maps. They named one of their replacement calves Doris, which Doris pretended to hate. Darren Pohl paid off his bridge loan early, stabilized trucking and custom work, and rebuilt a true repair reserve. He sold 2 underused pieces of iron and bought one older, reliable grain trailer in cash. A Heather move, he called it. He still kept the neatest shop in the county, but now every shelf had labeled envelopes: tires, hydraulic surprises, tacks, and stupid mistakes. Travis and Lynn Becker took hard medicine. They liquidated one late-model tractor, restructured term debt, and gave up high-rent acres that had become vanity acreage. The transition hurt, publicly and privately, but they stayed in business. Lynn started attending Doris's classes and became the one who asked the best questions about household draw discipline. By 2026, they were smaller and solvent, which Travis described at coffee one morning as a lot less fun at auctions and a lot better at sleeping. Mark Ellison stopped pitching Heather on selling and started quoting her 12% debt service rule to younger borrowers before approving expansions. Heartland created an internal resilience review worksheet, partly modeled on her planning format. He told his board, "Cash flow under stress is not pessimism. It's underwriting reality." Doris Schulte taught classes with ruler in hand and oxygen tube tucked behind her ear, refusing retirement because, as she put it, bad bookkeeping keeps reproducing. She trained 2 younger accountants to keep the program alive and made them memorize her sentence. People go broke in tiny emotional decisions with monthly statements attached. Ed Renshaw spent more time on his maps than he had in official service. He helped fund borrowers prioritize tile, residue, and water-holding improvements that paid over decades, not quarters. He told anyone who'd listen that soil quality wasn't romantic, it was balance sheet infrastructure. Wyatt Reeves, gone south, still brokering land, still polished. Around Hastings, his name became shorthand for outside money that mistakes urgency for insight. And the equipment? The old combine from 2015 kept running, now with another set of wear parts and a rebuilt unloading auger. The grain truck, old enough to vote, still hauled short runs after Darren helped reline brakes one snowy weekend. The patch machine shed roof got 2 more panels replaced. Different colors again, uglier and tighter. Nothing matched. Everything worked. On summer evenings, kids from fun families rode bikes near the extension lot while their parents attended class. Inside, dry erase markers squeaked across cash flow templates. Outside, pickup beds carried seed samples, toolboxes, and takeout containers. Prosperity in Heathers County looked less like luxury and more like continuity. One August afternoon, a young operator named Tessa, 23, first generation, renting her first 60 acres, stayed after class and asked Heather the question everyone eventually asked. How did you know to say no to $11 million? Heather leaned against the table and considered. I didn't say no to money, she said. I said yes to control. Tessa frowned. Same thing, kind of? Not if one comes with permanent dependence. She handed Tessa a blank worksheet. Start with break-even. Then ask what happens if you're wrong. At dawn in October, County Road South looked the way it always had. Low light over stubble, wind combing the ditch grass, the smell of diesel and damp earth meeting in the cold. Heather stopped the Ford at the edge of the new 320 and stepped out with her thermos. She crouched, pressed fingers into the topsoil, and lifted a dark crumble into her palm. No gold shimmered in it. No miracle. Just structure, moisture, life built grain by grain over years that didn't care about anyone's ego. Behind her, the old truck ticked softly. Ahead of her, Rose ran clean toward the horizon, where the processor's new steel legs cut a hard line against pink sky. Her phone buzzed once, a payment confirmation from the revolving fund. Another young operator, on time. She smiled, not wide, just certain. For a long while, people had mistaken her patched knees and old truck for scarcity. What they were seeing and misreading was strategy. Buy late, owe little, fix what works, keep reserves boring, and let compounding do the loud talking. She closed her hand around the soil, then opened it and let it fall back where it belonged.